Hello and welcome to another Ahead of the Curve show. Thank you guys for viewing and tuning in today. I've got my guest Patrick Wambold on from Epic Games. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. As always. So Patrick, would you mind giving us a little insight of where you started, where you came from, and how you ended up landing yourself at Epic?
Sure. That's an interesting story in light of recent events. But yeah, I actually spent most of my time prior to being here. I was based in Miami, South Florida area. I was working mostly as lighting, video production, working as media server programmer, lighting programmer, content creator. Then kind of started dabbling more with VR, AR, live content creation. And it's probably a couple of years ago, I really started digging into using game engines to do pre-visualization and then just create more like, I don't know, like AR phone experiences and things like this. And that's kind of what drove me towards Unreal. So I contacted them initially just looking for support. And after like a few conversations, they were just kind of casually asked, hey, you ever think about working? And I kind of took that as thinking like, well, yeah, I've wanted to engage you, of course. And they're like, no, more, sorry, like work for us. and so that's kind of how it started. And it took about a year to kind of work through everything. But obviously coming over in November and then having all this happen to the industry has seemed like just surreal, honestly. It's been great because I still get to work with all my friends. But at the same time, live events are not in a good spot right now. And it's unfortunate, but hopefully we can help in some of those areas.
Well, I think some of those things are starting to spin around too. You're starting to see a lot more pull on virtual production and a lot more progress that's being made in virtual production. I mean, Tomorrowland just threw off that happened this past weekend. That was just a huge success.
Yeah.
For everybody involved. I mean, I don't even think that the producers were expecting the turnout that they ended up having throughout the course of the weekend.
I don't think so either. Just talking with some of the people who worked on that, and I can say that since we did assist them with some things that they did an amazing job, especially when you consider the sheer amount of content that they had. It's like 35 hours of content that they had to create in probably like 2 months. So you guys at Prismax did a fantastic job. So definitely a shout out to those guys. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, I think, is around virtual, which I think should be expected. And I know, sports are coming back here in the States, at least, somewhat. And there's some things that are trickling back in. But I feel like it's still going to be a while before we have large scale, communal events again. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of opportunity out there for sure.
Yeah, I think the opportunity is coming more and more. I mean, even inside the sports arenas, we're starting to see a lot more kind of virtual modifications and different things that are being implemented to try and create the fan experiences, for example, and modify the fan experiences, which I thought was a really creative and neat way of making people feel like they're still inside of a larger event.
It was cool. I think the biggest complaint I saw about like the virtual crowds and stuff was we wish it was in every shot. It was like, I think unfortunately that was the worst part about it was, you wouldn't see it in one shot, then they'd cut to a wide shot and it's there, and then you cut to another one and it's not. So it was more confusing. It wasn't necessarily that like, oh, we don't like it. It's just like, why is it not everywhere? And I guess that's a valid criticism. I think that they probably just weren't sure if they needed to go all in yet, but I think it at least for me sold it a little bit. So I was like, all right, yeah, let's do it. Let's just put it on everything. So
yeah, I think it was quite effective in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to ask the viewers that are watching the show, guys, we're talking about Tomorrowland, and I was wondering if you, the viewers, had the opportunity to check the show out this past weekend, and if you had any comments about the show, love to hear about them inside the feed. So please feel free to post away. It would be awesome to hear what your opinion is of this past weekend's festival. There's definitely a lot of really good feedback, I think, that was popping along. Definitely throughout, different social medias and social media feeds. I had Bob Boniel, as one of the earlier guests on the show when I first kicked this off, and just reading some of the comments and the things that he had to say, it was pretty cool, pretty impressive.
Yeah. No, I did see as well, and and I think that's kind of thing when something like this happens. I think a lot of people are just not sure, right? They're like, is this going to be successful or not? And that's a tough metric. It's like compared to what, right? You're like, was it like the largest, streaming music festival? Like, I guess I'm not sure. I don't know how you even measure that right now, and so it's just kind of an interesting thing. But I thought what was really interesting is they actually kind of set this, I hate to say standard, but set this metric of that you can actually charge money for something like this, and that was something I know hasn't been done a lot right now. A lot of these other streaming events were just kind of, we'll do it for donations, for press, or it's a charity event or that kind of thing. And this actually kind of set up a framework for, like people will pay for this, and whether or not, you think the price was worth it or not. Like right now, I just bought a ticket because I want to support the industry, even if I didn't watch it. I was just going to buy a ticket, right? Because I'm like, I know these, everybody in our industry needs work right now, right? But I thought the quality was good, and I think it does set a good precedent for being able to do more of these kinds of things. So
yeah, and I think that I think that we're going to see a lot more of that. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about how Unreal was used within Tomorrowland?
Sure. Yeah, without getting into too much,
without getting into too much breaking that cannot be shared.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this is public, but so any of the larger outdoor stages were done using Unreal Engine. So I think the biggest challenge that these guys faced was just the sheer amount of things that they wanted to be in it. They wanted to really have it be as close to a festival experience as possible, and something like that means you got to have 200,000 crowd sim going on, which is not an easy task for any engine that I can think of, right? And so they were using it to do the crowd sim. They were using the new DMX stuff to record DMX. They were using tracked cameras with Stipe and using that data to comp footage. And it was really just it hit most every base, most every little area of like virtual production. And a lot of areas from live events too. But the coolest part about it was they also had to, there was, I don't know how many artists, like 90 artists or something. So they had to shoot this concurrently at different stages around the world. So you also had 4 or 5 different green screen studios that all had to have this setup going on. So it was definitely a logistical situation to sort out. I'm sure I wasn't involved in that part of it, but using all the tools that they had, I think, they definitely kind of pushed the bar on a few of them and gave us some ideas on some areas we need to improve. mostly the idea of length. I think that's the trickiest part with something like this, is the shortest set they're dealing with was like 30 minutes. And usually like a virtual production style project, like we're not doing 30 minutes continually, right? It's going to be in chunks, chunks of 5 minutes, chunks of 2 minutes, and that's how edits are normally done. But this is a 30-minute long chunk, or 60 or 90 minutes. And those are things that I think, just the sheer amount of data for that is a lot more than we're used to dealing with. And so it's definitely given us some thoughts on how we can improve things we're doing. So.
Yeah, without a doubt. I wanted to give a shout out to Christy.
Yeah, hi.
Totally agree with you about the virtual production and its necessary needs today. I think some of the, but of course, being there in real life, it's never going to be able to be replaced. But I think some of the interesting things that we've been talking about a lot too is it kind of introduces a new realm for production, and being able to integrate, what is real and what is virtual into these different production processes, and add kind of a whole new dynamic to the way that we experience and that we engage concerts. And it's going to be really cool to see how the industry bounces back, and when it does bounce back, because I think there's going to be some really great ways to implement the technology part of it that that's been created over the course of the past, short period of time, really, past months, years, and then integrate those into the way that we experience events today, which is going to be really, really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, and the other truth about, I see the comment about, just preferring the live experience. And I would challenge that assertion that maybe we just haven't shown people how good it can be yet. Because the other thing to think about this is, like, you know, inside a virtual world, we're not bound by things like weight limits, gravity, you know, typical constraints that we can't get around. You know, if you could have a, you know, perfect 4K VR headset, haptic suit, you know, with all the trappings, like, you know, I think you could create something that would be arguably way more interesting. I think just right now, like, the cost is the hardest part on a lot of these things. Like right now, it's just not, nobody has any of this equipment laying around, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. And I think that that's something to keep in mind, is like, we just might not have seen it yet. You know, like there might be, and that's also a challenge, I think, to everybody out there, is like, all right, well, if it wasn't that, you know, if there were ways that could be better, let's do it. Let's start working on it. So
without a doubt. And Saham is asking the question, what is some of the biggest challenges for a live XR production? And Saham, thanks for viewing, man. And it was great having you on the show a few weeks ago.
Yeah, XR is this interesting, vague term right now, but I take that to mean like LED stage plus camera tracking, typically, you know, is kind of where I guess read that. Because and so, I mean, in that case, like, I think a lot of the challenges are just matching real world with virtual world. There's a lot of things that you can get away with if you're just doing one or the other, like pure green screen or pure camera. But if you're trying to do like a mix of both, where you got AR foreground elements, LED background elements, you got cameras, you got talent, you got real lighting conditions, like matching all those things to give a believable look, I think is the hardest part. You know, if you are standing on a plane and there's no shadow, like immediately, at least for me, I've seen it so much, like it immediately breaks it for me. If I don't see at least a contact shadow, even just a fake, you know, that kind of thing. And so trying to get that believability, but then color matching seems to be the thing that comes up a lot, where you just have, you know, things in the background look one way and things in the foreground look another, and you're not sure what it is, but you know something's not right. So that's just my opinion on that.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of experiments that have been taking place around that whole concept as well. I mean, we've been looking at, well, I personally, of course, have been following Berto for quite a number of years and have had a lot of really good in-depth discussions. But, you know, he's done a lot of testing and taking real lighting, especially taking real lighting and virtual lighting, and integrating them together, you know, to try and experiment and creating those shadows and creating that sense of uniformity, and create that sense of realism. So what are your thoughts there? Richard Davis has brought up a point about, you know, these live events where you can feel the bass and see the light in your eyes. You know, doing that in a virtual sense might be a little bit of a stretch.
I mean, I think that just depends on what system you got at home, right? I mean, like if I got a line array and some Base Tech 7s in my house, and we were laughing about this idea, like in hindsight, that I was like, you know, I really should have like hooked up my Hue lights, right? My Philips Hue lights, and you know, got the whole thing going. All of a sudden I had a new idea for satellite parties, right? So instead of like, you know, like obviously you can't get together in large groups, but you could maybe do smaller-ish groups, right? And, you know, if you were, you know, broadcasting this, like rebroadcasting it on a large thing, and you had a decent PA, and, you know, some sort of light, you know, metadata was coming through with the stream, why not? You know, you could definitely create some interesting things. And I'm not suggesting we're going to completely replace live events with this stuff, but sometimes I think, you know, I think personally I overestimate what I think people actually want in their experience sometimes, you know. And it's like, you know, if I ask a lot of people what was their most interesting thing at like a show, you know, a lot of times it's not the things I think of, you know. It's like, no, they want to see the artist. You know, that was paramount. Everything else, I'm like, you didn't notice like the great, like, you know, like fly out there that was like perfectly in time. And, you know, no. They're like, I wish there was more pyro. So it's just different things. Sometimes.
More pyro, more fire, more special effects.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. They're like, I like the curtain, I like the rain curtain at the end. I'm like, nah, I hate that thing. But you know, like it's just different stuff, right? So it's fine.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, I think there's a good opportunity right now to to try and help personalize the way that we experience events as well, and maybe tailor the way that you experience an event as a person or as an individual. Because you're right, people go there for different things, and people experience different things, and people like to see different things when they go to the show, or feel different things, like Richard was mentioning. Feeling the bass, for example, at a show. And that's a really relevant point. And to your point that you were just saying, Patrick, building out maybe a home, like a higher end experiential home-based entertainment unit or system where you can be virtually involved with the show and maybe have some lights, some cheaper lighting effects or audio might be able to resolve some of that. Saham was asking again about a kind of a more technical question. Is the drift in the 3D tracking over long periods of time an issue?
I mean, there's usually not like a drift that happens. Like, I guess when I think of drift, to me that means like, you have a discrepancy that is kind of accumulating over time. And that's not usually the case. Usually, if there is some kind of discrepancy, it's somewhat temporary. It's not going to like continue to get worse. But this just depends on what tracking system you're using. But in general, they all are gen locked, so they should definitely not drift. But what I find more often than not happens is we're not properly accounting for things like lens distortion. I feel like that's something that is crucial, and it's kind of one of those fine details. And if you're just doing tests and short things, like you won't even notice it's a problem. But when you're really kind of in, kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of like, why doesn't this line up perfectly? A lot of it is more just, it's lenses and cameras. Like that's generally the problem.
I'd probably also say that would be more on more longer shots or longer, more steady shots where you're going over a more escalated kind of period of time, as opposed to kind of quick shots, that you would find definitely in more of a concert like Tomorrowland. I don't know how long those shot cuts were, but they were pretty darn short.
They were fast. Yeah. and truthfully, it's funny. I did see a lot of comments about this. And I think a lot of this kind of came back to the idea of just time. How much time did they actually have to do this? And so, how long would it take to actually like professionally edit together, or even cut like live and recut or whatever it was that they were doing in this case, every camera shot to be exactly what it was supposed to be for 35 hours of content. I mean, that's just a massive undertaking. And I think that's where some of this kind of came in. And yeah, it felt a little bit like a highlight reel sometimes where you're like, all right, this is cool, but, and maybe it could have been a little bit more, settled and called. But I think a lot of that just came down to like, hey, we got to crank this out. At some point, you gotta go with what felt good at the time, and maybe at the time that seemed like it was the best look that they had. So,
well, I think too, again, kind of, I know we've been kind of splashing along about Tomorrowland for a while here, but it was also the first kind of fully fledged virtual festival or event of its kind.
Yeah.
So of course there's going to be trial and error that is done within that process. And as you mentioned, with it taking course over such a short period of time, it's hard to be able to judge that and test that and see what's working, what's not working without really putting it out in front of that audience, right?
Exactly. And I think they got a lot of good, feedback. And there's already talks about another one. So I don't know. I hope that they do, and I hope that it's super, super successful. So it's funny.
Yeah.
I'm reading the comments here, and I saw one about Fortnite being one of the largest, most successful live events ever. And I appreciate the shout out there, but I guess like I think that metric is hard to say, because like, is it more successful than a Super Bowl broadcast? You know what I mean? Like, how are we measuring, engagement, right? Because like, yeah, it did have 13 million people that were actively engaged in an experience, but compared to broadcast television, that's kind of a small number. So, it depends on what the metric is. I think in a lot of these cases, like, how do you define what is successful, or
well, I guess that really comes down into analytics as well, and how those analytics are measured.
Yeah.
And how they're analyzed and utilized. It's it's one of those areas I think that are still being, experimented with. Like broadcasting companies have been able to do it forever, and they've been able to judge how many viewers and how much time they've been viewing and that sort of thing. But in our digital domains, we're finding a lot of our social media platforms are starting to do it. YouTube does it, Facebook does it, a few of them others do it. But I guess it also just depends on the systems and platforms that these people are using to deliver their media to the masses, and then be able to register that, collect that information back, and then compare it basically.
Well, and like you say, with all the streaming platforms now, it's nothing. I mean, that was one of the interesting things that happened, like during Travis Scott, as we noticed while that was going on, the number one thing on YouTube is just a broadcast of the same thing that's happening in the game. So it was like really kind of confusing, you're like, but again, like not everybody plays Fortnite. Not everybody knew how to get into it. It's also like a 70 gig download if you're on PC. So, it was just kind of funny that they just happened to correlate it. You're like, okay, well, so that counts, right? Or not, it's like hard, right? You're like, how do you judge then? You can only go off like official channels, you know what I mean? It's impossible to know what your, your overall reach was, I think, anymore. So
I think so too. Tracy's saying, TV seems passive. And I mean, it really always has been kind of passive, right? Turn it on, we watch it, we're like, oh.
Yeah. But it doesn't make it any less live. You know what I mean? So if you're saying live events, like I don't necessarily think interaction has to go hand in hand with that. But yeah.
Not necessarily, but it definitely adds a hell of a great new dynamic.
Yes.
Being able to be involved in an event. I think that's why e-gaming has been such a huge, or esports have been such a huge hit, because there's that sense of kind of interactivity that's within that. And you've got people that are like, there's no way to predict it. I mean, it's kind of like sports, but it's kind of all over the place, right?
I love esports right now for a lot of reasons, but I honestly, I love.
You're not biased at all, right?
No, definitely not. Well, I mean, I guess I'm like, yeah. But I mean, but it's funny, like what I like about it more than just like the fact that I work for a gaming company, it's just that it's kind of created this whole new genre of like people that stream and cast like other people playing. Cause like you don't watch somebody cast like a sports game, right? Typically, it's the announcer that's on the national broadcast, your local broadcast, but there's not like a local guy on ham radio, right? Who's doing like another broadcast that you listen to. But for esports, this is extremely common. Like you'll find, multiple people will give their own breakdown and analysis. Yeah, of this thing, and it's all freely available. And not only that, but like people will just stream themselves playing the game. And these are some of the most popular streams that are out there. And it's fascinating to me that, you have like a streamer personality now that like really like they a lot of them are also professional gamers, but some of them aren't. They aren't playing in any professional capacity. They're just entertaining. And I just love this new media, and it's definitely, I mean, if you watch some of these things too, it's crazy. Like they got green screen replacement, they got tracking, they got stats and all this stuff that they can do. And I'm like, they've really created like their own mobile broadcast session, in their house, which is great. I love to see that. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have anything super high tech here, which is kind of crazy, seeing as I'm hosting a tech TV show.
That is a very realistic plant. So, did a good job with that.
This was totally virtual, and I was able to pull this off with the and do a little tracking. I'd actually be pretty happy with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Some of the streaming setups are incredible, and I know NVIDIA's got their kind of broadcast tools now that are kind of targeting that market a little bit as well. It should make it even better. So,
you want to see some awesome occlusion? Watch this.
Yeah. Ooh. That is so realistic.
Isn't that amazing?
That's pretty cool. Yeah. How soon do you think the viewer will be able to roam freely within virtual events such as Tomorrowland? Well, that's an excellent question. Yeah. That's an excellent question, Scott. And I think that question is more to the fact that there's a large discrepancy between a streaming event and a massive multiplayer game, and right now I would say that I hate to say it's going to be a while, but I think it's going to have to take place inside of a different framework, something probably like a like a Fortnite or something like that, something that already has the hooks of a game in place to be able to do that. I mean, I know we have pixel streaming and we have these other capabilities, but a lot of these things, I think that, scale is still always kind of something that I think about in my head, where it's like, all right, would I really want to pixel stream to 1 million people? Do we have those many cloud instances available with GPUs and sound, like just at whim?
Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, they have them, but at the same time, it's like, if you needed to all of a sudden go from a few hundred to 500,000, Windows machines running with good GPUs and audio, those are much more rare than just Linux cloud, right? And so it's kind of an interesting idea.
Really scalability and availability more than anything, and the cost of investment. But I think it's going to be there. I mean, computers are pretty cheap now. The GPUs are very affordable. To be able to create those singular experiences where you are using cells or clusters to be able to do it, or even virtualizing boxes and being able to do it is becoming more and more applicable. And I think it's definitely more applicable today. I just don't think anybody's really just made the investment or done it yet. And for all we know, it could be being done in the background and could be released next week.
Yeah, I mean, right now there's nothing that it would stop you per se from, like I said, launching 100,000 cloud instances of Unreal doing pixel streaming. However, again, I think it's just what does that experience even look like, and how would you, what does that actually give? I guess in some cases. And so sometimes I think you gotta like answer that question first. It's like, okay, yeah, I can walk around in here, but why? Like, because like, at least for me, most concerts look great from right in front of house, right? Because that's where they were designed, and it's like, so do I need to walk like all over the venue? I don't know. Again, like, what's the reasoning behind it? And I think sometimes I always have to ask, why are we doing this? Not just, hey, let's just throw something at it. It's like, what are we going to do that makes this, necessary? So
I guess for me, like being at a concert and experiencing a concert, the one part that I think within the concert atmosphere and the live event atmosphere that is going to be really tricky to replace is the interaction of other viewers while they're viewing and experiencing it. Of course. And creating that emotional link, that's the one part that I think is going to is kind of what everybody's trying to kind of achieve or trying to chase, is how can we create a more communal based environment. And
I think that's where the interactive thing kind of has been coming in. It's like, we know we can't do this, so we will distract you with this, and that's really kind of how I see it. Smoke and mirrors. I could be completely wrong, but it's like there's almost no tangible way to have two avatars that are right next to each other, like talk via text and have typing or emojis or anything like this kind of thing, and have that be close. And would you even want to? You know what I mean? You hear everybody else's stuff going on in their house. There's people vacuuming, and there's people yelling at their kids. Like, like, would you even want that? Even if you could have voice. So I think instead of that, we're like, okay, let's give them something else to like occupy, right? Because if you're interacting with something, it feels like you're doing, you're having this communal shared experience. And so I think that's kind of like, I hate to say it's misdirection in a way, but it's like, no, we know we can't, recreate the same feeling that you go there with 20 of your friends in real life. But if we can give you guys the opportunity to do something else together, like play a little mini game or whatever, just try and bounce each other off this wall or whatever it is, that gives you something to do together. And so I think that's where a lot of it is going.
I mean, actually, just for an example, last night we were playing Jackbox TV, which is always super fun. Yeah. That's playing cool. Jackbox with, one of our good friends here in Orlando on Discord. And the cool thing is you could be able to do the screen share so that you can have the game in front of you, but you can also see them and you can see their reactions. And when a joke is made or somebody's bluffing or whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, it totally happens. I mean, I think we've all been on Zoom a ton lately, right? And you can tell when you're looking at the 9 box of people, like which ones are paying attention, when you slide a little joke in there and like the one guy like doesn't even move, you're like, yeah, he's not even listening. So you can tell, like, it's definitely like nonverbal in a lot of these things.
Or is he even there?
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, just like, but yeah. So, but yeah, I saw a question. It was about multi-platform engagement. I mean, I think that's where you have this idea of like either it's a game which supports all of these platforms, or it's something like pixel streaming where it can actually just be streamed to a device, and then a cloud device is doing all the calculation. Because a lot of other things, like right now, they still rely on you having a good machine, right? A game, requires that, or it requires you to optimize it for each platform that you want to distribute on. So that's where this idea of pixel streaming is really powerful, because now you're taking advantage of cloud processing. So instead of, you can watch the same experience on your mobile phone as you would, on a high-end PC. That's really where the power of that is. And that's why we like it a lot as opposed to HTML5 or some of these other things, because you still need a GPU for HTML5. It doesn't really solve the problem. So
yeah, unfortunately, I think we're always going to need the GPU, because even on the pixel streaming, you're still generating stream.
Yeah. It's in the cloud though. I mean, that's all it is. It's just streaming video. So you offset a lot of the cost. You can use a Chromebook and it works fine. It works the same, because really the graphics card's in the cloud. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just for an example, the stream that we're doing right now, the platform I'm using is called StreamYard, and it's all cloud-based. So everything is being rendered up in the cloud and then shot back down. So it alleviates a lot of time and cost, actually, to being able to do things like this. So Richard was mentioning Wave VR is a VR experience that tries to match a VR festival.
Yeah, I've used Wave VR, and I know those guys over there. And I think it's definitely a different tactic, because I mean, now originally it was just VR, and now they're kind of starting to branch into this other world where they're trying to do more like streaming and things like this. I gotta be honest, I wasn't like super thrilled with the last few that I've seen. I liked one of their old ones, Lindsey Sterling one, actually. I thought was pretty good, but I saw it in headset, and so I think it was definitely something different to the in VR headset experience versus watching the stream again later. I was like, it didn't quite have the same impact, but yeah, they're definitely doing some stuff over there. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think we also kind of tailor that back to that individualized experience again, on how you're going to engage or experience those events virtually.
Yeah. Yeah. Latencies in 5G. Yeah. We're all waiting for 5G. I hear you. I'm really, it's one of those things where I feel like they have set such a high expectation for this that I don't know. I think it's impossible to meet at this point. They've really touted it as this thing that will solve everything, and I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. I mean, it probably will for like a very short period of time until we start to exceed it and start requiring even more.
Because that's remember when you first got your LTE phone and it was like, it's like, wow, it's fast. It's as fast as the cable. And then as soon as like the first iPhone came out that had it, like all of a sudden everybody had it. You're like, oh, well, that's about the same again. So we'll see. I'm hoping it will be good. I'm hoping the latency will be better. But, cool.
So Patrick, I wanted to also ask you, about kind of the scalability of Unreal and stuff. You were mentioning some of the stuff in the cloud. What are some of the I guess more some of the intuitive ways that you find Unreal being used today?
I mean, right now, like that's one of the like tougher questions I think to answer, because Unreal is a game development platform, and so like literally you could write your own game engine in Unreal if you felt like it, right? Trying to use it sometimes seems like when people ask me what should I want to use Unreal, I'm like, well, what part? I mean, that's like, I want to use Windows. Like, you can do anything with it if you really wanted to. But specific to our industry, I think there's push in a lot of areas. But I really like this idea of pixel streaming being kind of a gateway to I guess more mass appeal. Because I think that right now the barrier for some of these experiences to run, is pretty high. Where if we want to run full real time 60 FPS, 4K, whatever it is, like it is taxing, and it is, most people just don't have that at home. Truthfully, maybe with next gen consoles but still there's a cost to that, right? Whereas everybody already has a phone and everybody already has something else. And so that's why I think pixel streaming is a really good solution for that. But the other thing that I see is just, a lot more because of COVID, especially, we're having to try and put a lot of these processes in the cloud. Whereas normally you'd all be sitting in the same room and you could watch the same thing. It's like, no, now we have a guy in a mocap studio, one place, who's working with a team somewhere else, who's working, and so we'll have 12 people running multi-user. And that's the other big thing is multi-user editing. We can do it across VPN networks. And so you can work on, my lead here, Juan, actually did a great thing, where they were working with the crew over at Netflix, and there's like a short little I don't know, like mini documentary thing about it, BTS, I guess. And they showed how they do it. Like they have two guys in mocap suits in like different places on green screen. They have people editing in one place, and they have directors reviewing shots in another, and it's all kind of just synchronously happening. And I think this has just pushed it. COVID has pushed it faster. We all wanted to do it, but now it's like, it's mandatory. So
I was going to say, look at Matt Workman, who's been just going like a freight train for the last several months.
Yeah. I have a theory that there's actually with him. The sheer amount of content he releases is like daunting. I'm like, either he doesn't sleep very much, or there's like two guys that look very similar that are churning out videos. Because I'm like, if I sat here all day, I don't think I could create the number of videos he does.
Let alone be able to watch all the stuff that he's been doing, right?
Yeah. Props to him for sure. So, sorry, Scott, I missed your question there. Yeah.
Scott's posing another very interesting question, which again, I think is one of those kind of holy grail questions, but is there any work being done for real-time volumetric captures to bring subjects into rendered environments as opposed to compositing with green screen or XR?
Absolutely. Well, so there's kind of two competing pipelines for this right now. One is you create a digital twin of the character and put them in a mocap suit, right? As we've seen with DigiDoug, for people that went to like SIGGRAPH, like that was pretty incredible. For me, I was like, this is arguably better than the best volumetric capture I've ever seen, and so I was like, that seems to be one route, is that, you create the digital twin, you put them in the mocap suit, and you can, do facial capture, and you can create this really realistic experience that way. It does take a certain amount of time, and but I think it is a really good way to do this. The volumetric capture side of it, what I'm noticing is there's definitely a large gap between doing it offline and doing it in real time. Single camera, fairly simple in real time. Multi-camera, there's a lot of processing, lots of things that have to happen ahead of time, and usually it gets boiled down to a video that is then has to do some other kind of voxelization and then calculate the UVs and all this other gack that happens. And there's not.
You find a lot of that being done in how all the video game cutscenes are all produced.
Yeah, well, cutscenes are all done. They're not doing volumetric capture. They're definitely just mocap and actors and stuff like that. But the volumetric side of it, it's just right now there's not a great standard for it. It's like, do we want to stream this in as vertex data? Do we want to do it this way? And a lot of times it just ends up being video because it's easier, right? So we have RGB video for color, and then we have a different one for depth, and you have to set a range and do some kind of voxelization process where it's creating these things. And so it right now isn't a great process. I think it's something that we will see more of, but there's definitely not a solid oh my gosh, this is the way we do it. I know the guys at Dimension have been doing a great job with some of this stuff, and there's a lot of kind of ideas out there for how to do this, but most of it's still offline. The processing is just pretty heavy, and unless it's in a professional setting like that, I personally don't think the quality's been what I would expect, what I would compare to creating a digital twin. So.
Yeah, it was got me just thinking about uses of computer vision as well to be able to do that. And I know that there are tools that are being developed that, if not are already developed, that could possibly do it in a real-time manner and process.
Yeah, the real-time part is the tricky part for sure, because it can be done offline. Yeah, of course we can. We've got some pretty decent methods for that, but even there, I feel like I watch some of these and I'm just like, I don't know. It's like, because what's really hard is it's hard to de-light somebody, right? No matter whatever you captured them in, the light, those are the lighting conditions that are going to be on the texture. And when it generates textures, it's not going to generate something nice that you can load into Substance Painter. It is going to be something that is indistinguishable and can't be used ever again, in a 2D. You couldn't touch it up, right? So you'd really have to, capture it in, I think, a better way that is somehow completely delit, that doesn't have specular, which is really hard to do, because that way you could actually relight the 3D stuff in the scene and make it match. that's where I think I'm always seeing the discrepancy with volumetrics right now. It's like, you have to recreate the scenario in which you want the character to be in when you capture them ahead of time. And it's like, well, that defeats the point. It's like, the whole point of having them in 3D is I want to be able to redo that part. But if they always have a specular dot on their head, even though there's no light on, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's where we have the biggest problem.
Isn't it funny how when it really comes back to it, it all comes back to lighting?
Yeah, it does.
I always find it ironic because it's where we started.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. That's one of the reasons I like TV, because it was so important. Like in other shows, they'd be like, they didn't worry about it. But in TV, it was like, no, it was the lighting had to be on point. Everything had to be right. And I liked that part of it. It definitely made it. It definitely was more interesting, I felt like.
I remember, actually when I first got into 3D and first got into rendering 3D scenes, how different lighting was. And how different you had to treat lighting within a made up environment as opposed to in a real environment. And I started to realize how really spoiled we are being able to do things in real life as opposed to being able to do them in a virtual environment. It's
interesting. You definitely do because I guess all the things you're trying to recreate in a virtual world are already there for you in real life, right? Like infinite bounces and GI and things like this, like they just exist, right? And so those generally help you, whereas in a virtual world, you're trying so badly to recreate these things that you're just like, gosh, I wish it would just like bounce the way it normally does, That's definitely what makes it an art form. And you'll see it too, like when you download an asset pack or something like that, right? And it's not lit, right? Because you took it from TurboSquid or CD Trader or something like that. Like you see how important it is, because you'll load it up and you're like, wow, this doesn't look like anything like the renders, and you're not wrong, but at the same time, it's just funny. Like you realize how important that part of it is. You're like, whoa, this would have been better if I would have, maybe bought the whole scene.
So Ruben was asking, how far do you think we are from having our first virtualized event?
Is there any way you can clarify what virtualized means?
I was going to say, didn't that just happen?
I'm not really sure exactly if he's talking about.
I guess to what degree do you mean that, Ruben? Like, to what degree do you mean our first virtualized event? Because there's various different levels, I think, that are happening and taking place right now.
Like I know here at Epic, we already got those implants like the Matrix, so we're already there. But, no, I'm kidding.
Remind me next time to come by and bar scan you.
Yeah, we're already there. I just jack in and we're good. But I think that kind of depends on what that is, right? Because I think if it kind of just depends. I know we've got virtual events we do in Fortnite Party Royale like almost weekly now. Diplo's on like weekly, I think, or once a month.
So let's. One of the things I wanted to ask you too was where do you see the future of Unreal, especially within, say, the live event industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now we've definitely, just by the fact that they've kind of hired some people in this area, it should hopefully signal that they're very serious about this section. And I think that's something that I didn't see in other platforms that was out there, and that's one of the reasons I was kind of on this way. Is just simple things like video capture and time code and MIDI and all these things are standard. They come in the engine and they're already there, and DMX now and all these things. So I think really where we're headed with this is to, one, make it easier. Like that's the big charge, I think, for us, is that like we realize that artists are not game developers and they have a different skill set. And so telling somebody, to hook up 100 blueprint nodes to do, the gradient they want is not really a great solution for some time, for people. And so we're really trying to make these tools like more palatable so that they can churn out content faster. That's really been our big thing.
So more or less streamline the workflows and streamline the work processes. And
exactly. But at the end of the day, the other thing to remember about Unreal is that it is a development platform. So it will never be a DCC completely. It's never going to be Photoshop completely. Like we're going to give you all the tools and hooks that you need to make your things work. You got to still provide that last 10% kind of on your own. But the trade-off for that too is that it's free. So, that's a huge benefit over any other software that's out there, is that it's completely free to use in this industry. You don't have to pay royalties. You don't have to pay any of the stuff. So that's pretty big win. So
I would say so. Scott was asking about the updates regarding the fellowship program. Is there anybody he could contact to find out about that?
No. Don't bother our poor people about this. They got so many applications. Literally, there was a ton of, as you can imagine, positive response about this. So they are going through them. They will get back to everybody as soon as they can, but there's not really a good way to check up on it right now. But they're swamped with applications for sure. So glad that there's so much excitement, but at the same time, I think it was a lot more than they were anticipating.
I can tell you I applied for a couple of positions at Unreal like back in March, and I still haven't heard a reply. So
still haven't heard a reply? Okay. All right. Yeah. That could be too. But yeah, no, the fellowship program should be really good. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows this, but I mean, we already did one of them. And the first one was a little bit more like, I hate to say invite, but it was kind of just like, hey, we want to try this idea out. We're giving it a trial run. So we kind of brought some people in and did this thing for like 5 weeks. And it was, everybody there was so positive about it. That's when they decided to do this other one. And I think, I think they didn't quite anticipate how many people would really be willing to give up a month of work to do it.
Well, giving up a month of work or a month of not work.
I think that was the thing. With all of a sudden,
while you're working on Unreal.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not too bad when you can equate that to $120,000 a year salary.
Yeah. No, exactly. So he said, I'll settle for VR presence and being able to have multiple VR attendees with an artist feed. I mean, I think that's already possible. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't, but I honestly this is just my opinion. Like I love VR. There's probably 5 VR headsets in this room, right? And so like I'm a big.
I think we've got 2 or 3 kicking around.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it, but at the same time, like there's not that many headsets. Even if you got every person who owned a VR headset to get together in the same room, it would be dwarfed by even like this, a small game. So I think that's the
put them into a sports arena, basically.
Yeah, it's tough, right now. So Berta says, well,
so Berto was asking, will Epic ever make any hardware? And I'm going to say that you might want to. I don't know if you got a straight answer for that, or if he has to elaborate.
No, well, it doesn't matter. No, we don't make products. So, never. The only hardware we make is merchandise. So it's like you can buy little Fortnite goodies and whatever our other games that we have as well, but no desire to get in the hardware business.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of benefits to that in a lot of ways, I guess, as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just it's a whole different thing, as you know. Our idea is we want it to run on everything. So why would we make something that competes directly against that idea? Yeah,
I think that's really an interesting point too. When you have something that is multi-platform and is as flexible as it can be, being able to span across those multiple platforms, you have to. Well, you're basically already supporting them within your software platform. So I could just imagine what it'd be like if you were to do that and create your own hardware platform as well, which would be, I'm sure, quite interesting to try and upkeep.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft does it, but they're a lot larger company, right?
Well, at least right now.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you never know where Epic might go.
That's true, for sure.
So Patrick, I just wanted to thank you for being on the show. I wanted to thank all the viewers as well for viewing. We're going to continue the discussion, but I did want to take some time to thank you for coming on board with me today. For those of you that want to check out more about Patrick, or where he works, I should say, check out Epic Games. Patrick, do you have any personal place where people can go and maybe get in contact with you a little easier?
I try not to post any more stuff personally. I mean, really, UnrealEngine.com is probably the best place. Obviously, because I work on the engine team, so I don't know if many people know exactly how we work structurally here, but there's the side that works with like our primary games, and there's engine team and enterprise. And I'm on the enterprise side, but generally we work. Everything we do is with Unreal Engine for the most part.
And for those of you who do want to get directly in contact with Patrick, I know it's pretty easy to find him on Facebook, and it's pretty easy to find him on LinkedIn.
I try, man. I try to keep up. Facebook's like a beast, but yeah, it's definitely one of those things where there's so many platforms right now. It's tough to keep track of. But yeah, I definitely, you guys can always reach out to me. I occasionally post like terrible tutorials on my YouTube channel. Because usually what I've found is if somebody has a question and I'm answering it directly, like there's a good chance somebody else has one. So I just started uploading them, and like I remember the one with DMX, I just checked and it was like, I don't know, there was like 1,500 views or something. I'm like, wow, okay. So I guess there was a lot of people that had this question. So I don't know. Hopefully we're going to be able to do some more of this stuff like officially. Like I hate posting it to my personal YouTube channel, but hopefully we'll be able to do a little more of these like short pointed tutorials and make them a little more official, hopefully. So, but
that's awesome. That's actually great to hear. No, I'm sure I'll be rocking the same boat within several months for 7 cents, but
yeah, I think right now that's one of the key things that people have been, I hate to say, like I don't know, that's been lacking on our side. Is just like the documentation for a lot of these enterprise features is somewhat sparse, and I think it's because we get these features created and put in, but we're the only ones who know how to use them. So we end up having to like write the docs, which nobody wants to do that. And so that's the hard part. And then also like, how do I condense down, something that has like, it could be 200 pages worth of stuff, into, okay, here's exactly how you do it step by step. And it's a tough thing sometimes to just.
It takes a special person to be able to do that, but I could tell you that you're not alone. I mean, every single software creation company / manufacturer are all struggling with the same thing. Documentation is a beast. It's a bear. It takes a lot of time, and it actually takes some really strategic technical writers that understand how everything works as well to be able to write it in such a way.
That's the hardest part, because again, we are at our core a game dev company. So if I hand a C++ programmer like a brief on how to set up DMX, he has no idea what this is. He has no construct to work from. So you just got to hope that my notes are good. And I think the other like thing about that is, it changes so much. So right now, like, we don't document experimental features for this reason, because by the time it gets released, it's going to be completely different. So that's one of the reasons we don't do it.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Scott was asking another question about, can environments built in Twin Motion be used in Unreal?
I think the answer right now is no, but that, of course, will change. You'll be able to round trip them very, very soon. I think it goes one direction right now. You can go Unreal or Twinmotion, I think, but I don't know if it goes the other way around. But I know that's on the agenda.
On the roadmap.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know you guys are really good about actually keeping your roadmap pretty pretty much open and available to the public.
Well, that's the important part, is because one of the worst things we want to avoid is we don't want people to spend valuable time, money, resources developing things that we're already developing. There's obviously some secrets and stuff around UE5 and rendering techniques and all these other kinds of things. But eventually these will all be open source. So, you can go and look at them and do what you want with it at some point. But generally speaking, if it's a specific feature, we're trying to be pretty transparent about it, so we don't have somebody, developing this same thing that we're like, oh, we're already doing that, like, because we just don't want you to waste your time on that part. And really, we want people to focus on, okay, we put this system in, like DMX, it's on my mind. So as an example, it's like, okay, yeah, but we're not going to create a library of lights. We're not going to create, there's all these things that we're just not going to do, but we're going to give you the hooks to do it. So we'd like you to spend your focus on that part of it, doing that final polish, not creating like a DMX protocol, so to speak. Like we should handle that part, but you guys need to make it pretty. So.
I might be adding some stuff to your roadmap then soon, Patrick.
Yeah. Well, we're always open for ideas. I would say on the protocol level side of it, we try, there's like thousands, right? So there's only so many of those we can do. We do support mega grants for people that want to write their own though. So if you have an idea, if you want to integrate, something that we don't have and you think you can do it, for a decent price, submit a mega grant and you might just get your wish. So, but it's just, it's one of those things where that part's very tricky to keep, we just kind of have to pick and choose. All right, what are like the big chunks? And then, it's like, well, yeah, of course we can't, we support ArtNet and SACN. And be like, well, can we support like ETCNet or something? You're like, well, there's like 100 of these things. Like, we got to kind of pick the big ones sometimes.
Yeah. It kind of comes back to a conversation that we were having earlier about normalizing or standardizing, what these protocols are, because there's just so many of them now.
Yeah.
A lot of them, to be honest with you, do the same darn thing. They just need to be consolidated, and nobody has taken on the time to just consolidate them or end of life them.
If anybody's listening who works for
such a long period of time, that just outright should be an end of life by now.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody, object tracking seems to be the one right now that seems the most obvious that should be unified. I mean, it's literally X, Y, and Z, location rotation. It's not a complicated thing per se, but we have dozens of protocols that just tell me where something is in space. And I think that if there was a way to somehow get all that together, it would make a lot of our lives a lot easier, honestly, because right now there's just so many of those, and everybody's got a different way. But that goes back to a deeper problem. Nobody can even agree on which direction is up. So is Z up or is Y up? Nobody seems to know. So
is it Z? Is it Z or Y?
It's Z. But it depends on where you're at. So Scott
is up. I agree. Y does need to be up and down, and Z needs to be this way.
Yeah.
And
X depends on if you're looking at 2D plane or
3D.
I've noticed things that seem to be like 2D in nature first, and then like kind of flip, like, they have a different way of doing it. It's like I feel like things that were purely 3D had like their own kind of, they're like, no, like it's definitely Z, but I don't know. It's interesting. And then which way is Y negative? It's like, okay, now we're getting crazy. Is it right-handed or left-handed? Nobody can agree. So. And
now we've gotten everybody's spun up. We've got Danny now talking about Y. We got Saham on here. Everybody's gonna have opinions.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the tricky part of it. It's like, well, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, it's just 6 numbers, man. Like, we should be able to tell a position without 10 different protocols. But that, again, I understand why it happened, but I would love to definitely. Exactly. Zed.
And John Higgins, one of my colleagues, says it's Zed, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like in Canada, because we do say Zed.
It's Zed everywhere, but like the US, right? Like, it's just like feet. You just gotta like bite that one.
So I want to ask you, for those who are watching that are not very familiar with Unreal Engine, where would you suggest they get started?
I mean, this question comes up a lot, and the best place to get started is the launcher. Like, it sounds simple sometimes. Yeah, exactly. I find that's honestly sometimes the hardest stumbling block is like people will be like, I don't know, I just kind of want to learn. I'm like, well, have you downloaded it and launched it yet? No, it's like, well, I would go there first, and do that. But truthfully, I would probably go to our online learning center for the very, very basics. There's a course called Your First Hour in Unreal Engine. I would say that if you've never touched it, that'd be a good one, especially if you have no prior 3D experience. Like, it goes through some pretty basic stuff. But at some point on everybody's list should be Introduction to the Fundamentals of Real Time. This one, I don't know. This one should be mandatory, I think, for anybody who wants to work in real-time graphics, because he describes very, very detailed. I mean, he even says this is just an overview, but like it's probably a few hours of this, just exactly how one frame of video is rendered. And when you understand what all the processes are and why things are happening in a certain order, it helps you with, optimization. It helps you with, choices about what you would use and not use. It helps you about all kinds of decisions that you make. And I after watching it, I was just like, wow. Oh, I had 2 thoughts. One, this is insanely complex. I can't believe it even renders at 60 FPS. It's like, I don't understand how they even got this to work. And then 2, it was just like, okay, like now I get it. Like, okay, now I know why certain things like are more expensive than others, why I might choose certain, things, and so I thought it was extremely helpful. So I thought I knew what real time was, but apparently I was mistaken. So if you go to if you go to unrealengine.com, there's a section for online learning. We call it the EOL, Epic Online Learning Center. And if you go in there and just search, you gotta log in, you gotta have an Epic ID. But if you just search for Introduction to Real Time, I think is what, or Introduction to the Principles of Real Time, I think is what it's called. It's great. It's just, he goes through so many things, and you kind of just learn like, oh, okay, we do a base pass, and this is a depth thing, and this is why we do this, and you kind of learn like what parts of it are, you know, are responsible for which things, and it gives you some just generic steps as far as like how to figure out whether you're CPU bound or GPU bound, what's a draw call, like why are all these things important, and how do they connect, and you can kind of make better decisions while you're creating things instead of having to go back and try and troubleshoot why is my scene not running, you know, as fast as I want it to. So it's really good.
Well, now I've got some homework to do too.
Yeah, no, it's totally worth it. I mean, that's a good one. I mean, I can give there's a couple of others if you're brand new to it. You know, I always tell people like, don't skip on the basics. Like the basics are lighting, materials, you know, and like some basic blueprints. Like you will, no matter what you're doing, you will not be able to have a good looking scene if you don't know how to light it and you don't know how to use materials. Like it's impossible. So spend time, understand how the material, you know, is work, understand, you know, why like you would use a lit versus unlit or translucent, or what are the types and how to hook them up, and lighting. Like just learn what the different types are, whether it's real-time lights, you're using stationary, static, baked, static, you know, cascaded shadow maps, you know, you're using light masks, or you're using distance fields. So distance fields are my favorite right now. So anybody that is looking into this, I'm a big proponent of real-time lighting. I like to stay away from baking as much as possible. So look into distance field shadows and kind of get a little primer on that. So
yeah, absolutely. So Scott, just to answer that question, we'll post a link in the video afterwards.
Actually, I don't think I can link directly to it since it's in the Epic Online Learning Center. So you actually have to log in and just do a search for it. I don't think I can.
Maybe we can put some instructions or something on how to get there.
Yeah, I don't think I can deep link it. So.
But we'll write something up to reply to that one way or another.
Yep.
But Patrick, again, just wanted to thank you so much for being on the show. For all the viewers out there, thank you guys so much for viewing it week after week. It's been great having you on board. Mm-hmm. It's been a lot of fun doing these shows. And just kind of give you guys a heads up, next week I've got a very special guest that's going to be on the show. Mm-hmm. Very honored to have this person on board. Not that I'm not already honored to have Patrick, of course, on here, but I've got Rafik Anadol coming on board next Tuesday. That's a Tuesday show. That's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So that's going to be a really cool one. We'll be talking about a lot of the art process of how he generates the art, talking about AI and some of the stuff that he's been working on with his studio. So please come back and check that out next Tuesday. And as I say every single week, stay ahead of the curve.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Patrick.